All right, so thanks guys for coming tonight. We are going to be having a chat on publishing as it relates to the analog games market. This is going to be more like an overview of publishing rather than getting into the nitty-gritty of publishing, but we're going to do that a little bit, though that's not going to be the focus of tonight. So if you have any questions along the way, I just would ask that you hold them until the end. We got like a little Q&A slide that we can hit then. So let's dive into this bad boy. Who the hell are we? That's a good question, right? So we are Lionwing Publishing, or we are two of its members. One sick.
He's sick.
Yeah, I think that we had someone else coming.
He's been sick.
We had someone else coming tonight. He was sick, and the three others live out of state. So we are representing the four others who are not here. We are a localization company who publishes Japanese tabletop games for the West. We focus on picking up the rights to and publishing unique, for the most part, anime-themed board games, card games, and tabletop RPGs. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of covering the whole gamut with what we look for. We work with independent studios, or design circles as they're called in Japan, as well as kind of big brand companies who are looking to extend their reach via localization and subsequent international release. So we cover a lot of ground, although we've only announced one project. We have 4 in the pipe, so we're pretty excited about that. I don't know when we'll be announcing that stuff, but more on that later. So who are we individually? I'm Bradley. I founded the company. I'm the director of operations, whatever that means. Mostly means just yelling at Tyler all the time to revise stuff.
It's all of us, really.
yeah, that's true, actually. Minus Rema, she always does a really nice job. I never have to correct her. I started my career like 10 years ago in the video games industry. I started out as a journalist and then moved into the localization sector, where I've been since. Always wanted to be in localization, ever since playing like my first working designs RPG on the Sega Saturn. And my mom was like, people like get paid to localize text in English so you can read it, Bradley. I was like, cool, that's what I want to do. And she was like, good luck with that. And here I am. So since then I've been a project manager, editor, lead editor, some QA stuff on MMOs, RPGs, visual novels, blah, blah, blah. I founded Lionwing last year after deciding that I wanted to marry my two loves in life, which was localization with tabletop games. As I've gotten older, I've moved away from video games a little bit and more into the digital, into the analog world. And so I thought, hey, this seems like a good idea. Here we are. Not a lot of people doing it, so maybe we've captured something here. I am joined by this guy right here.
I'm Tyler Inchwender. I'm the on-staff graphic designer, so I've kind of been doing a lot of the visual work for updating cards, swapping out text, as well as all the marketing stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
He's very busy.
Yeah.
And I think hates me most of the time. I'll take that as kind of. And then we've got 4 others who, like we said, aren't here. Ben was supposed to be here tonight. He's a local guy, but he's got some sort of sickness, and I've got a 5-month-old who's at home, so I told him to stay away from me. And then we've got Chris, who does all of our game translations. We have 2 different translators. One person handles our game translation. One person handles our Japanese relations. And that's Rema. She's native Japanese. And then we've got Nicole, who does our PR and our community management stuff. Mm-hmm. All right. That's out of the way. Let's get to the good stuff. Publishing. Before we talk about it, what is it? In the most rudimentary sense, it's the process of taking a concept through production and putting it into someone's hands, the consumers. So getting it to the marketplace. That's essentially what publishing is in this market. So publishing sort of means something different depending on your industry. I'm just going to be talking about it as it pertains to the tabletop games industry. And also a disclaimer, I'll mostly be using the term tabletop games or tabletop gaming as sort of a catch-all to mean board games, card games, miniatures games, TRPGs, all of that, all right? Okay. So there are several approaches to publishing in the tabletop world. I've picked out 3 that I think are the most common, 3 that are, I think, the most beneficial and effective and the easiest routes to go, although this first one is far from easy. But nevertheless, I'll lead with this first one, and I'm going to be talking about just traditional publishing. Traditional publishing can be broken down into 2 different categories. There are big brand publishers, and then there are independent publishers. But I hesitate to even call them independent publishers because that seems to imply that they're like small, working out of their basement. but they're not. So a big brand publisher would be, to me anyway, someone that's beholden to a larger company. Wizards of the Coast is beholden to Hasbro, whereas an independent company is maybe a Cool Mini or Not, or a Steamforged Games, for instance. So they are their own entity, they're operating solo. That being said, they both pretty much do the same thing. Some are easier to get into than others, and I'll talk about that here in a second. What I've done is I've broken down each of these slides into the pros and cons of this publishing approach as opposed to the next two. So traditional publishing is what most people think about when they think about publishing in the tabletop games market. Despite that, and despite it being super attractive, it's the hardest one to actually do. And I'll talk about why that is here in a second. The traditional publishing companies offer what other people can't, and that is they offer full wraparound services for your product. So they're going to handle all your printing, your manufacturing, your fulfillment, your shipping, your marketing, your invoicing, your royalties, all of that, they're going to do all in one-stop shop, which is why so many people seek them out. Because oftentimes, as a board game designer, at least those who I've talked to that talk specifically about designing board games, want to do what they're really good at, and that's designing games. They don't want to have to deal with all the back-end stuff that sort of gets in the way, that either they find a hassle or they're not very good at. And so a traditional publishing company is a great way to go in that regard. It's a great way to go because not just you get to bypass all of that and stick to what you're good at, but a traditional publishing company has a huge reach typically. They're going to be able to get your name, get your product out there to a ton of people through their networks, whether that be community or whether that be through distribution, which means you've got the potential to make a lot of money. Potential, and I'll come back to why I'm emphasizing potential there. So these are companies that are going to take care of all your logistics. They're going to do all the dirty work that most of the time as a board game designer you may not think about. Before we founded Lionwing, we created our own board game. It's on the back burner now. I think we're going to release it in 2018. I'm not quite sure. So we can speak a little bit to the actual design aspect of things. You don't necessarily know what goes into publishing a game until you start talking with someone about what it takes to publish a game. And there's all of this stuff that you either didn't know exists or you don't have access to knowing exists, even if you tried to find out whether it exists or not. And I'll talk about this in a bit. The tabletop games market is like a super cryptic one. And people are really unwilling to share their experiences with people because it is, there's only so much real estate to go around, and everyone's either too scared of having their ideas taken or their territory taken. So it's really hard to find people who are willing to talk to you freely about what goes into this process, which I'm hoping tonight we can sort of do a little bit of that. The other best part about a traditional publishing company is your name is going to then, from that point on, if you're getting published by someone like a Fantasy Flight Games, your name is building equity, which means you're going to have more leverage and negotiating power for your second game, third game, or your 10th game down the road, because now you can say that I was published under this wing of this company. So obviously that is all the good stuff that goes into traditional publishing. The bad stuff, even though I didn't put it here, it's really hard to get in with one of these people, with one of these companies. And I'll talk a little bit about how you actually do that in like 4 slides. So I'm going to press the pause button on that thought and get back to the cons here of what I have written down. Royalties are something that if you're getting into tabletop games, you need to be thinking about. Typically, publishing companies, whether they're big or small, are going to offer you 2 ways of getting paid. They're going to offer you a one-time lump sum up front, or they're going to pay you through a sales royalty percentage. Big brand companies, if you are a new designer, and I'm going to define new designer as having 3 games or less. If you are a new designer, and also I'm going to say designer in the sense of whether you're solo or you're with a team. If you are a new designer, you're not going to really get much in the way of royalties, despite that's what's going to be offered to you. So a big brand company or even an independent traditional publishing company is not going to, if you're new, take the risk on acquiring your product and then putting their name on it and then putting it out to retailers to sell. That's a huge investment for them. That's a huge risk. They're not going to pay you money up front necessarily in sort of a one-time lump sum because of that. So what they're going to offer you instead is the next best option, which is a fine option, and that's a royalties model. So they're going to pay you based off the sales of the game. Royalties can be really awesome, except in the tabletop games industry, they're like not super awesome. Most people, when they think about royalties, they're thinking, okay, I designed this game, I came up with it, I've laid it all out, I've thought it through, and maybe you've even play tested and balanced it, and you're just basically giving someone to say, hey, print this for me. That company doesn't really care about any of that based on how much they're going to offer you with royalties. So like in a lot of other markets, you might think like a 40% royalty is super fair for basically creating an entire product. You're not going to get 40% in this market. You're not going to get 30%, you're not going to get 20%, you're not going to get 10% as a new designer. You're lucky if you get 5. The standard is somewhere between 3 and 7, but most of the time if you're new, you're going to get 3.5. Which doesn't sound bad if it's like, hey, you're going to publish my game and you're going to print 10,000 copies and I'm going to get 3.5% of that. I'll take that. That's a couple $1,000. I'll use that toward the next game, right? Except we're talking about royalties based off of net sales, not your top line number, your bottom line number. So just some quick math, if your game MSRP is for $40, that company is going to put that into the distribution tier at 60% of that cost. So $24 is what you're actually going to make or what your company is going to make. And then you're going to get 3% off of that based on how many units sell. So suddenly your game that sells for $24 to retailers, you're going to see like 72 cents of. So there's a joke like in the tabletop games industry, like how do you make $1 million designing board games? You put $2 million in, and that seems to be the case. So low royalties with big brand companies if you're new. If you're offered a low royalty, that's fine if you're getting a big print run. Like if someone offers you 3% and they're going to print you 50,000 copies of your game, like, okay, maybe that's like worth not even negotiating on. Like, oh, I'll just take it. But if they're going to like manufacture 1,000 copies and you're getting 3% of that, that's not worth your time. So we'll talk about like negotiating terms down the road, but low royalty costs definitely can be a con here. Also with a big brand company, what they might want to do is they just might want to acquire your IP. Now, if they do this, they're more likely to give you money up front, just kind of a one-time sum. We're going to pay you this to take your IP from you, to take your copyright. That's up for each individual designer or team to decide if they want to do that, because usually if they want to do that, they see potential in it, which means they're going to monetize the hell out of it, and you're not going to see any of that monetization if they're taking your IP. So, all right. I don't want to talk anything more about that. The biggest thing here is with big brand publishers, you don't have to worry about anything really. Like they just do it all for you. So keep that in mind because I'm going to come back to that point here in just a second. All right. I'm going to skip over that. I should go here. So the complete opposite of big brand publishing or traditional game publishing is self-publishing. Self-publishing is a totally viable way to go in 2018 for sure. Especially with crowdfunding, obviously, it's been the viable way to go for a number of years, especially because crowdfunding is super kind to the tabletop games market. It's never been easier to self-publish a board game, card game, whatever. The problem with self-funding or self-publishing is the funding aspect. Since you're spearheading this entire operation and you're handling literally everything, not only can it become super time consuming, so be sure to like take that into account with whatever else you have going on in your life, it's going to be super expensive. That being said, there are some serious pros to self-publishing, and that is you're not beholden to anyone. You're free to do whatever you want. You're free to spend whatever you want. You're free to have 1,000 copy print run just as free as you are to have 100,000 unit print run. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but and the best part of all, your profits aren't shared with anyone. So that $24 that we were talking about that a publishing company gets, well, then now that's all yours. So there's more money to be made if you can do the legwork to get your game out there so that you can build a customer base to actually buy your game, which leads into the cons. Obviously, if you're self-publishing, this is one of your first projects, which means you probably don't have a huge reach, and the market already is hard to penetrate. It's hard to penetrate with a big reach, let alone penetrate without a big reach. So you're going to throw money at marketing, at advertising, at hiring someone to come on and do your PR for you or do your marketing for you, or maybe you're super savvy, but again, that's going to take time. That's time away from doing other things with publishing that maybe you should be doing instead. So for some people, self-publishing is super viable. It's the way to go because there's more money to be made. However, there's a bigger upfront cost and there's a bigger risk to your pocketbook, obviously. And really large print runs are just out of the question. So if you have a killer idea and a killer game, but you can only print 1,000, is your game really all that killer? Because it's only going to ever really be seen by 1,000 people, right? Or bought by 1,000 people, unless you have enough money to meet demand if like 1,000 copies go out pretty quickly. But again, how likely is that going to be to happen if your main approach to selling your game is like on your own web store and on Amazon? Like, yeah, you could probably rack up a few sales there, but really you need something more than Amazon and your own web store and having a small presence at a convention. Nevertheless, I don't want to scare people away from self-publishing. It's a great way to go. I just think self-publishing is really well supplemented by using a consolidator. So this is like, I think if you are new to publishing or new to self-publishing or you're a new designer trying to navigate these waters, self-publishing with a consolidator is the best bang for your buck in a lot of ways. So a lot of people don't even know that consolidators exist in the tabletop games market. They've never heard that term. They've never seen a company market themselves as a consolidator company, but they exist. But the reason you probably haven't seen them or known that they exist is there's only like a handful of them in the nation, like less than 12. And I only know of one who's currently taking clients. So if you do know they exist, they're like super hard to get into, but I'll get to that here in a second. Consolidators can best be thought of as publishing partners. So what they're going to do is you're going to handle all your own printing and all of the logistics when it comes to shipping, with an asterisk there. These people are going to take your product that's already printed and ready to go, and they are going to put it into the distribution tier for you. Why would you want to do that as opposed to just trying to put your stuff into the distribution tier yourself? The reason for wanting to use a consolidator in this sense is if you have less than 5 games to your name, a distributor is probably not even going to respond to your email. If you have 1 game to your name, or you don't even have that yet, like your game's getting ready to be printed, don't waste your time contacting a distributor. Unless you have someone like on the inside, they won't talk to you like at all, which is really frustrating because they are the primary way of getting your game into a bunch of stores. Self-publishing, like I said before, yeah, you can have like an online presence, but really brick and mortar is still a huge thing for tabletop games. And there's over 4,000 tabletop game stores in the nation. You probably know 3,000, you probably know like 20, right? Which leaves you with like 3,980 that you don't know. So a distributor is going to know those stores. The consolidator is going to know the distributors that know those stores. Getting your foot in the door with a consolidator is how you are going to make money as a new designer. It truly is. Unless you have like this amazing grassroots idea of how you're going to spread news of your game and then sell it at a high capacity, then this is the way to go for sure. The best part here is no one's talking about your IP or taking your copyright. They're not even in that business. They just want to know if you've got a product and if they think that they can sell your product. Consolidators are like way more open to thinking that they can sell your product to a distributor than a distributor would be to your product if you contacted them and approached them directly. So not only is a consolidator going to have the in, they're going to be able to market your game internally to distributors way better than you probably ever could because they obviously know that territory really well. and they're connected to multiple distribution tiers. Whereas if you try to find all these people, you might find like a distributor. And they have tons. So another pro of using a consolidator is you're going to make a lot more money early on than you would if you went through a traditional publishing company or if you just did this all on your own without a consolidator. And I'll talk more about why that is here in a second. Consolidator companies also offer fulfillment and warehousing of your game. So a lot of new design teams, a lot of independent guys will have their game printed and it'll be shipped to like either their house and they'll just do it all out of their garage or their basement, or they'll use like a local storage place around, around the area. But if you're going to use a consolidator, you don't necessarily want to do that because you're going to pay for you're going to pay freight shipping from your printing over in China to go to your house, and then you're going to pay shipping from your house to where the consolidator is. So you're going to pay shipping twice. So don't shoot yourself in the foot there. Whereas if you use a consolidator, you can have it go straight from the printers to their warehouse. And most consolidators offer warehousing and storage options at like $4 or $5 a week per pallet. If you have a game, I'm trying to think, the game the size of, I was just playing Bloodborne a few nights ago. If you have a game the size of Bloodborne, you can have 1,000 units of that stacked on a single pallet. So it's super reasonable to store your place with a consolidator. They're not trying to make money off of you storing with them. They're trying to make money off moving your stuff off that pallet into the distributors. So their storage is super, super easy. I think fairly cheap. A lot of consolidators will also either handle fulfillment for you or will have a fulfillment partner. And why is that important? Well, if you're going through crowdfunding and you've never done it before, fulfillment's like the make or break. So many new companies die on bad fulfillment. I think we have probably all in here backed a Kickstarter and have been told that it's going to be released in May, and we don't get it until December, right? Or even later. I've had some games, it's like I'm getting them a year and a half after I was supposed to, right? I mean, that kills your credibility. If you plan to ever go back for a second Kickstarter, my guess is you get less money because of that. So if you can just avoid that and hire a fulfillment company or hire a consolidator to do that for you, you're going to save yourself a lot of hassle, but you're going to save yourself a lot of money in the long run. When it comes to fulfillment, so many people say, I'd just rather do it myself. We have someone on our team who in the early goings was like, we should just handle all of our own fulfillment. And I'm like, that's a terrible idea. It's penny wise and dollar foolish, ultimately, if you're new. Do I want to say anything more about that? Not right now. Okay, so the cons of a consolidator is you're going to pay them. The good news is you're going to pay them a fraction of what you would get paid if you went through like a traditional publishing company. So the industry standard right now for a consolidator is they're going to take 15 to 30% of your net sales. Most consolidators aren't ever going to take that money until your product sells, which is awesome. So you're not going to pay them anything up front. Some guys do an upfront cost, but they're sort of like the big wigs are handling Paizo stuff, right? If you're new, you're not going to be talking with them anyway. So 15 to 30% to save you a lot of headache, to ultimately make you more money in the long run, and to be able to get your stuff into 3,000 plus stores that you would not have gotten into anyway without using them, is a small price to pay, which is why a consolidator is always the way to go if you're new. It almost sounds like we're a consolidator company. I'm pushing it so hard. I should be pushing traditional publishing harder because that's what we are. Okay. The cons of a consolidator is you're not going to get long-term growth from a consolidator. They're not handling marketing. They're just putting yourself into the distribution tier. Maybe you get some long-term growth because your stuff sells really well, really fast, and a distributor says, hey, we want those guys' next game because it sold super fast. Let's do it again because it made us money, it made you guys money, it made the company money. It's a win-win-win. Barring that, you're not going to get any growth from a consolidator. That's not what they're there for because they're not going to help with marketing or anything like that. They do take a sizable cut of sales, but as we said, that's worth it. There are storage fees, but they're small. There's only a few, and they usually aren't taking new clients. And these things can like shift on a dime. So I know Diamond consolidators were taking new clients in November. They started the fulfillment process on Gloomhaven retail in January and stopped taking clients for the entire 2018 calendar year because of Gloomhaven, one game. So that's how fast things can swing. So a consolidator, if they're like, hey, we're taking clients and you think you want to use a consolidator, just say you're going to use a consolidator even if you plan on backing out. All right, so again, it's great to be able to supplement consolidators with self-publishing. That's what a lot of people do. That's what like most new companies on Kickstarter do. I don't have any like hard statistics, but I would say it's like upwards of 70%. Well, that's total like anecdotal, but upwards of 70% of people probably on Kickstarter are using a consolidator if they're first, second, or third time company. Okay. So there are these are the two main types of publishing agreements. I don't need to go over this again because I already talked about it pretty much. Just be like, if you're negotiating with a traditional publishing company, just be like super mindful about like net sales and gross profit and all of that. Traditional publishing companies are in the business of making money for themselves, right? Let's just remember that. So they're going to like give you this awesome stuff up front that sounds really great, and especially if you're new to this, you're not going to know any better. So it's like, yeah, I want to do that. And really, there's probably some back-end shady stuff happening to make sure that they maximize their profits, which means you don't maximize yours. So we'll talk more about that here on this slide and that next slide. So traditional publishing, ultimately, while it's the hardest to get into and while there's a lot of stuff that goes along with it that can be really stressful initially, it should probably be the ultimate goal because it's where you're going to make your money in the long term, especially if you believe in your product a lot. If you can get picked up by a traditional publishing company, obviously they're going to have a network to be able to push your stuff to a bunch of people. Way better than you ever could initially. So what does the getting started process look like then with getting in with one of these companies? Well, it's one that's actually quite simple, made needlessly complicated and cryptic by most big brand publishers. And it's really broken down into 5 steps. You write your pitch, you send it. After you find a company that's seeking open game submissions, which good luck finding that, because even if a company is accepting game submissions, they probably won't say that anywhere, ever, on their website or in person, or by any human being spoken outside of that company. If you can figure out that they are accepting game submissions, you then have to try to find the right contact person. Because you might think, well, I'll just send it to someone in the company and they'll forward it to the right person. No, that's not how this industry works. They will let that email die in their inbox. Or just like, delete, that's not mine. I didn't see it. That means I got to do more work. No thanks. So you got to find the right person. Good luck doing that. You're going to hope that you submit the game in the right format because they won't tell you that either. And if it's in the wrong format, you'll offend them or annoy them. And then they will have a slant toward your game. Or they'll send it off to the person who looks at game submissions and they'll say that you sent it in the wrong format. And they'll write that up as meaning some larger character flaw that they don't want to have to deal with. Or you'll send it in the wrong format and it literally won't go through. And then you think you sent something and you never did. And most of the time, they won't have like someone respond saying, hey, we got your submission. So that's pretty cool too. Then once you get past all of that impossible stuff, you then have to negotiate for a set of terms that are reasonable. A set of terms that you won't know about or be able to find online. You could search like some active forums and maybe find someone there who has been through the process, but likely they're not going to want to tell you too much because again, then you encroach on their territory and that is less money for them to make in the end. So those are the 5 steps of publishing with a traditional publishing company. I hope that didn't scare you away. If you can do all of that, here's what you should look for. You need a company who's going to market your stuff and PR your game using a variety of outlets. Just using 1 or 2 is not enough. So you want someone who's going to have a convention presence. Obviously, you want someone who's active and who has a following on social media, go figure. You want someone who's active on BGG. So if you if anyone here has read any of like the Stonemaier Games blogs, they have amazing graphs about looking at like where people who spend their dollar on various advertisement, where do they get the best return on that dollar spent based on where they advertised and through what platform. And like BGG accounts for like 50% of all ad traffic sent to one's Kickstarter campaign, as opposed to like anything else. 50% comes from BGG. So,
Board Game Geek, by the way, right?
What's that?
Board Game Geek.
Oh yeah, sorry, Board Game Geek. I just assume everyone's into board games, and they are not. Board Game Geek is like the mecca of all things board game. So if you want to find board games, if you want to find people who play board games, if you want to advertise for board games, if you want to like get ideas for board games, if you want to run your ideas past people for your board game, that's where you go.
Yeah.
It's a good site. Thanks for that, sir. You want to discuss print runs. Because even if a company offers you like a super high royalty percentage, let's say they're like drunk one day and they offer you 15% royalty, you might think like, oh yeah, I'm doing that right now. Give me the contract, I'm signing. But if they're going to give you a 750 unit print run, that 15% is going to make you like $1,500. So don't do that. So you want to talk about royalty percentages as they relate to the print run. Are they offering a second print run? If there's a demand, are they offering a third print run? These are conversations you need to be having. I don't even know if anyone's going to be having those conversations now. You have me wondering, like, oh God, who in here is actually publishing tabletop games? Who am I talking to? Who's my market?
Just saving for the recording for later, you know.
There we go. Perfect. You want a company that understands fulfillment, especially if you're using crowdfunding, and you want someone who understands distribution, and has a strong network, an established network with distributors. Distributors that have had success with pushing your product to retailers who in turn have had success selling your stuff. Because you might have a distributor who can push your stuff to retailers really well, but like if that retailer is like their primary retailer, or if that distributor is working with retailers who are primarily based out of like South Dakota. I don't know what like the market is in South Dakota for selling board games. I don't know if those retail shops are selling any board games. I don't think anyone lives in South Dakota, right? So sorry to anyone who's listening who lives in South Dakota. That was a joke. You want to have these conversations. You want a company who's going to have a strong presence at conventions, obviously, a lot of sales, or just like people walk by and see your name. That can go far, right? And then you obviously want someone who's going to pay you reasonably. So in 2018, at the end of 2018, we will be opening our doors to offering publishing to independent designers and independent design teams. And our process looks nothing like this. It's actually just a link. It will be just a link on the top of our website, and I can say that because I've already made the whole page and made the whole form. It's just sitting on the back end. And it's got a whole bunch of drop-down menus that you just click, and then you like type in your name, and sometimes you type in like about your game, and then you just like, there's a submit button, and it goes to me. And then I review it. It's so easy. And I email you back to say, we will get back with you. All right. So what we will provide during that time, but also what we provide right now for our Japanese partners, is marketing, printing and manufacturing, fulfillment, shipping, invoicing, distribution, obviously localization, and then super competitive royalties. I don't even want to call them competitive royalties because that would mean like there are other people who are offering royalties like us, and that's not happening that I know. So we do all that. What we look for, and also what like other companies will look for. New designers, remember that's like 3 games or less. Low-cost games. So if you are a new designer, you might come to us, and I'm mostly going to be speaking about this aspect in regards to us because I don't know the insides of what Fantasy Flight looks for. But for us, we're looking for low-cost games if you're a new designer, because we have no idea if your product is actually going to sell. Low-cost games means less of a risk for us. And it's probably less of a risk for the designer because you're not having to bog yourself down with coming up with some super complicated game. So even if you came to us with like, hey, look, it's Gloomhaven, basically, I'm thinking like, wow, that's Gloomhaven, basically. That is so expensive to manufacture, and I don't know if I can sell this because Gloomhaven exists, right? And Gloomhaven has the Gloomhaven name. Low-cost games, that also means not a TCG. If you come to us or really any company in 2018 with your TCG idea, we will hate you because distributors will hate you because retailers hate distributors who push them TCGs because TCGs don't sell. So, expandable card games, the living card game, as Fantasy Flight has trademarked, that's far more reasonable. TCGs, not so much right now. That isn't to say that a TCG can't thrive in 2018, but a TCG can't survive or thrive in 2018.
It's a trading card game, right?
It's a trading card game.
All these acronyms.
So is that exclusive to like games using booster packs, or is it like any games with cards whatsoever?
It's a booster pack.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, if you have like a Pokemon or a Yu-Gi-Oh or a Magic game, like that's what I mean for those who may not know TCGs. All right. So for us, we look for attractive games, which sort of goes hand in hand with our anime or Japan themed games because they have super attractive games, though I'm heavily biased since I like Japanese stuff, of course. But you'd be surprised at what an attractive game does for someone who's browsing the store. I was just at Sci-Fi City a few nights ago, and there's 100 board games staring at me. And sometimes I'm just like, I just want to go and like pick something out based on like what it looks like and like the small blurb on the back of the box to see if like this matches what the gameplay is like. That helps me understand the market as the head of this company. And sometimes a really attractive art style, aesthetic, presentation, box art can go a really long way. I've seen games turned down. We have passed over games because of art style, and had decent mechanics, but art style actually means something. We look for also niche games. So when we open our doors to things beyond like anime themed games, we're going to be looking for niche games. And that is a super vague term because I was a niche game in a niche market. I'm not going to define it for you, so figure it out.
Moving on.
For the most part, even when we open things to designers beyond those in Japan, we are still going to be favoring anime-like games. We will favor games that have a Japanese slant to them, whether that's Japanese history, Japanese culture. You don't necessarily have to be based out of Japan to produce a game that has an aesthetic or mechanics that are reminiscent of a design philosophy elsewhere in the world, right? So that's always helpful. Veteran designers, there's a lot more leeway with us, with other companies, obviously. Still not TCGs because we all will still hate you. Trading card games. Thematic board games, thematic miniatures games, anime and Japan themed games. There that is again. Okay. That is sort of the gist of things. Again, this is a brief overview of what publishing sort of looks like in this day and age and looks like from our experience as an up-and-coming publisher. So there were things in here that we did not cover, certainly. There's more information to be had that's out there that you might be able to find. So this is not the end-all be-all of publishing by any stretch. This is just sort of a primer. If you're new to this field and you're looking to do this kind of thing, this is going to give you some bullet points that you can then go and research yourself. So, would you add anything, Tyler?
No, I think you kind of covered everything. I mean, I'm definitely more on the design side of it, so.
Would you add anything when it comes to what we look for, what other companies might be looking for in terms of graphic design?
I mean, I definitely agree with what you were saying.
Yeah, should you shell
Not
out
only
top
should it be,
dollar?
does not look like.
What's that?
Should you shell out top dollar for graphic design before you approach a publisher?
No, but I think it can go a long way to help. Because think about it, when you walk into a store, like what catches your eye, what doesn't catch your eye. You know, if something looks really cool, it's going to draw you in, and then it has good game mechanics, which is another thing we're looking for. Like, we want to play. We want to be producing fun games that people do want to play, obviously. So if it looks good and plays good, then yeah, why would we not want to make that?
For sure.
Really, yeah. So I mean, that's the kind of trick, though, is finding that balance, right? Because it doesn't mean that a game that you could have a game that has great mechanics, is a lot of fun, and has a poor weak design style, or may have a very unique design style that some people may not find that attractive, but it's what you want, and I think that is also fun, you know. But I think that's one of those things that you kind of have a case for, you know.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. Especially, I think graphic design can actually. You said it's a plus, basically, right? Like,
Yeah.
Do you want to shell out top dollar? Maybe you don't. Though I would say like bad graphic design can break your game. And I think specifically because we've had so many conversations about this, like typeset, like font. Font is people don't
Readability.
Yeah, for sure. Like people don't put enough stock into how powerful font is in a print-based game. If you have garbage print on your card, people are immediately not going to want to read what's on your card, which means they don't want to play your game any longer. And they were all put off by a font, right? I mean, it seems like something so silly.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, from my perspective too, with that, like if you really pay attention to look at a lot of the card games that you have, look at the cards, and really look at the font. A lot of them have a really basic font on because they usually defer to readability. But if you're able to find a font that looks nice and is kind of cool and lends to the style of the game, but is also still readable, it totally changes the feel of the card and can really make it feel like not only very professional, but also just kind of give this cool aesthetic. They're fun to look at all of a sudden. They're more engaging. But that can also be way more time consuming to like we made our first game, instead of just having a large half of the card as a field where you can just put in text, we were designing custom boxes, that fit the size of the text, and it took forever to make, but they look really sharp, So it's one of those kind of balances where it's what's worth your time, what kind of content are you using, how much real estate do you have on your card, does the character take up a lot, or is it just text?
For sure.
It's a lot of stuff you got to consider.
It's also a matter of accessibility, because I know a lot of older people that are into board games, and their eyesight.
Totally.
Yeah. Because it's real easy to get down to 5-point font.
Like my parents, if they see a board game that has 10-point font on it, they're like,
yeah, can't do it.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's important to also consider gamers with disabilities. How do you work around that so that they can be able to engage with your game in the same way, right?
Blindness, yeah.
I mean, I think back to our first project or localization project that we have coming up. Tyler and I had so many conversations about font because it's coming to us, through Japanese characters.
Yeah.
We're looking at katakana, kanji, hiragana, and their typeset does not equate to the fonts that we have, right? So the rest of the card, we're working off of a template. It's already all made for us for the most part. They already had a graphic designer go through and design the cards, and we're just kind of filling in the blanks, right? But not when it comes to the font. Mm-hmm. Then we have to decide, okay, what's this going to look like? How do we maintain the feel of the original card while also still being readable, while also being sort of eye-catching, but not too eye-catching? We had a particular conversation where I was like, dude, Tyler, you got to try this font. This is going to look so good. And he was like, nah, dude, that's going to look bad. And I was like, no, it's going to look good. And he's like, nah, it's going to look bad. I can tell you. And I was like, no, it's going to look good. I can tell you. So he's like, okay, I'll humor you, basically. And he sent it back, and I was like, that looks terrible. Oh, God. You were right. I should trust the graphic design guy. But
it's only because I already played with it.
But, I mean, so you can get a little too cute with fonts, right? So sometimes the best font is the basic font, and other times it's not.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to spice it up.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really goes a long way to keep it simple. Think of I try to err on the side of usability. Try to think will this impede gameplay? If you're trying to understand, I want to be able to quickly look at a card and say, okay, I know that's a 4, or whatever it is, or that's these words, versus just having this crazy cool font that is arguably illegible, especially when it gets on a smaller size.
Yeah, for sure. It can get in the way.
It can get in the way, yeah.
Another thing that we sort of came up against in localization, which, having been On the video game side of localization, you don't really have to deal with much. On a card, you only have so much physical real estate to work with.
Yeah.
The Japanese language says a lot more with a lot less characters than we do in English, right? So a card description on one of the original Japanese cards maybe took up half of the allotted text box room. But for us, we were out of room.
There was one that was like 2 lines, and it was like 6 to 7 lines for us.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, how do you begin to work around that? Because a 6 to 7 line card is usable, but is it attractive? Or does just that wall of text scare someone off to where they don't want to play that card?
Mm-hmm.
Or it makes them feel insecure about playing the game? Or it messes with their confidence and they don't want to be put back in that situation the next time they're playing a competitive card game. So they just don't go back to the game because of one card, right? And maybe that one card came up the first time they played it, and maybe it was in their opening hand. They never want to come back to your game again. And then they spread that to their friends, who spread it to their friends without ever having played the game. So it's this chain reaction that you don't even take into consideration, especially in localization. You just assume, oh, it's in English. You don't even think about what it probably was like in another language. Mm-hmm. For us, that's our job, to ensure that you don't think about what it was like in another language. It's way easier when you've got word wrapping in an engine as opposed to not word wrapping on a card. So I think that's sort of a unique challenge to localization in the analog games market for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. So with negotiation, 2 questions. One of them is, what format does it take in terms of communication? Like, is it going to be like back and forth with like written contracts, or are you going to be in the office like in an interview where you're talking about rates? And the second thing is, when you're negotiating back and forth, how dangerous is it to kind of push numbers higher? Are they going to like is that going to scare off publishers, like just doesn't want to do with you anymore? Like, they'll just not offer you another return offer, or
Sure.
Is it pretty safe?
So if they've already gotten to the point, I'll answer the second question, then I'll answer the first. If they've already gotten to the point where they want to engage in a conversation with you about your game, you're probably not going to scare them away with negotiating tactics because they want your game, right? They're just going to tell you no, or they're going to say that's ridiculous, no, right? It's going to be one of those two. As at the end of the day, we're making games ultimately. Maybe this is just my approach, but I think we're making games to like make money. I don't think anyone here wants to like just make a game and then like never see anything from it again, right? I mean, you might. I see some looks around the room.
I think a lot of us are amateur, like video game people or amateur board gamers, designers, and I think the main desire there is just to make something cool that we can be proud of, but making money is also very good as well.
Sure.
Right.
I think it does come down to a balance. Like, you got to have fun with what you're making, but I always caution people, like, don't be a mark for your own product. Like, at the end of the day, if you've got a really good product and you can sell it to someone, like, you should sell it to someone. And that comes down to how you negotiate really well, because you're not going to, when you're negotiating with a company, you're not going to get what you deserve, you're going to get what you negotiate for, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have to inflate some numbers, I mean, it's just like, it's like going to a car lot, right? You're going to have to use some tactics of your own that might be a little unreasonable to get ultimately what you want, because you can bet your bottom dollar that the person across the table is going to be doing the exact same thing. Right. So that would be my answer to question 2. I hope that answered it. Question 1, it sort of depends on the company, your product, where they see themselves taking your product, and what kind of company you're working with. Most, however, are going to do it back and forth over email. They're going to throw out an offer, they're going to write it up in a contract, send it to you. Hey, tell me what you think about it. Send it back with any revisions, or if you like it, let's go ahead and move forward. That's how we do it. Now, we're a little different because all of our clients are in Japan, so it's way easier to shoot emails back and forth, especially because of the 12-hour time difference. It's easier to do that. Though we have been on Skype and have had face-to-face conversations like that, and in that case, it's just like you would be having a negotiation with anyone else. But for the most part, you're going to be handling it through email. Now, if you like get your foot in the door with like Wizards, they're probably going to fly you out and have a conversation with you in a room with like a panel of people. But for your first few games, yeah, it's going to be a little informal. And I actually think that's really helpful for someone who's new, because you don't have the pressure of having to perform right there on the spot. You can kind of think about it, look it over, talk with other people, run ideas by them, and then come back with what you ultimately think is best for you. Does that make sense?
That's exactly the answer I
All right. Excellent.
Kind of follow to your comment as well. I feel like we definitely kind of feel like we have the idea of is by making money off of our games, it will allow us to make more games and experiment and grow and try out new ideas and stuff like that as well. So yeah, because that's how I started out as well. Just like I just want to make something that's cool.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how even you started. It was just like we just make games.
Yeah.
But then I was like, wait, we should do something like this.
Yeah.
Thinking about how you guys started, how did you guys get into publishing board games specifically from Japan? And I guess you just recently started this company, so this has been a recent thing.
Yeah, for sure. So, since my love of localization in Japanese games goes back multiple decades, I knew a long time ago that I wanted to be in localization, right? Having worked in localization and the video game side of things, I knew that I still wanted to work in localization, but I didn't want to necessarily work in a crowded field. Like video game localization. There's so many localization studios out there in video games right now that being a new localization studio in that field is super hard. Games that do get localized are jumped on really quickly, and why would someone want to go with a new company when they could go with like a NIS America or an Atlas or an Exceed or whatever, right? So that's part of the answer. The other part is there are so many good Japanese board games, so many good Japanese designers out there who are not having their work seen by the amount of people that it deserves. Stuff that's just not leaving Japan's shores that I think should. Fantastic ideas, beautiful art, really, really interesting mechanics. That stuff deserves to be played by the rest of the world, and no one's really doing it. There's like one other company that's only focused on localization like we are, and that's just not enough to cover the vast field of board games over there. Yes, board games, it's still a relatively small market in Japan, but it's a big enough market where there's a whole lot of games out there not being seen or talked about by anyone in the West, and I think that's sort of a travesty. So we hope to be able to sort of bridge that gap there and help out Japanese designers and also introduce to Western players what they've been missing for decades.
So you mentioned like new mechanics from Japan. Do you think, I know in the video game industry, usually you see a lot of like more successful games being a twist of something that's really popular already.
Yeah.
Is it any different in the board game industry in terms of like novelty versus familiar mechanics, or like?
I think there's always going to be some familiar mechanics in a game. I think there probably should be to some degree, so you make the player feel a little at ease with what they're playing, right? But I've found that there isn't a lot of like parody, there isn't a lot of like mimicking of Western games in Japan. Like, so co-op board games are becoming huge right now, right? Like dungeon crawlers, roguelike dungeon crawlers are becoming big. Look at Gloomhaven. So co-op dungeon crawlers in Japan don't really exist. That's not a thing. That's not something that their target demographic is really into. They're more into social games. They are into thematic games, but it tends to be more like competitive card games, not necessarily TCGs, but card games with some kind of new mechanic that they've thrown in there, mixed in with some tried and true mechanics that I think everyone knows if you've played like a Magic or a Pokemon or something, just to grab like a big name out there. So you see a lot of both, but I would say that there's a lot less familiarity than there is borrowing ideas and putting a slant on it. Though that does happen, by all means, for sure.
So what would you recommend for, I guess anybody who's got like a finished game design or like is in the process of working on a game but hasn't prototyped yet and is like thinking about a publisher in the future, like what would you recommend they should be for that stage of the process?
Say that last part again.
So if you're working on a game or you've got one ready for publishers, like
Yep.
what would you recommend moving forward from there? Like start, I guess you should do all your research on Kickstarter if you want to try and self-publish, or start reaching out to publishers and that kind of thing. Like,
I think the first thing you do is you figure out how you're going to print the thing. Like, do you have the money to print?
yeah.
Obviously, tabletop games are a way cheaper investment than the digital side of things. However, that doesn't mean that it's cheap to get into board games. Printing costs can go up really quickly. For a 1,000 unit print run for a moderately sized game, I mean, you're looking at $8,000 easily. And because everything's printed overseas, you got to factor in like $1,500 for freight costs, right? So there are expenses up front, and you need to know that, and you need to know how you're going to take care of that, which is why a lot of people turn to Kickstarter, and which is why like base funding goals for tabletop games tend to be fairly low. A lot of them are $10,000 or under. I mean, certainly we have all seen like the tabletop game that's asking for $150,000. But that's like a really involved game with a lot of components. Most are not like that. So I would say first, figure out how you're going to print it, where you're going to get it printed, and then go from there, because that's going to decide, do I need to go to Kickstarter or can I do this myself? I think Kickstarter is a fantastic tool to fund your game, but I think it's also a fantastic marketing tool.
Right.
So that's where I would start, and I would also, you can never start early enough starting to talk with fulfillment companies, consolidators, if you want to go that route, publishing partners. Even if you're going to self-publish, you got to figure out how you're going to get your game to people. If you're printing it, then it's worth getting it into as many hands as you can. And there's a lot of fantastic articles on that out there about printing in the board game industry and how you can do that, and what are some of like the best places, where are some of the best places to go. I think Stonemeyer Games has like a running Excel sheet that breaks down like costs of printing, costs of fulfillment, and all of this stuff. So the resources are out there in that regard, but that's where I would start for sure.
Stonemeyer's great. Like, I've been reading them for a long time.
Yeah.
I just had a yes, you guys are opening up indie stuff like later this year. Are you trying to take more of the consolidator approach, or sticking with the traditional publisher you've been doing?
I meant to mention this. We're going to be taking sort of a hybrid approach between a traditional publishing company and a consolidating company.
Okay.
Because there are too many great aspects of both. There are too many cons of both. If we can merge the two, eliminate some of the cons, obviously some of the cons are obviously always going to be there, but if we can eliminate some of them but add to the pros, I think that's a win-win, and there aren't a lot of people out there doing that. And I think if we can step up and do that, that would be ideal, not just for us, but for people looking to get their foot in the door. I think it would be sort of the ideal solution.
Yeah.
I wish when we were designing our board game a few years ago, there would have been someone out there doing that.
So why did you guys not move forward with your own game?
Because we had this idea.
No,
honestly. Yeah, we were like getting ready. I was like getting everything wrapped up, and he was like, "Dude, there's like this huge market that like we're like no one's tapping into. Like we should be tapping into this." I'm like, "All right, let's do it." We're changing everything.
Yep. So we started like figuring out like release dates and building and our game just kept going. We were first like, we'll localize one game, then we'll release our game. Then it was like, we'll localize 2 games and release our game. And it's like, well, we'll kickstart a game, then we'll release 2 by our own, and then we'll do another Kickstarter, and then we'll do our game. And then it's like, okay, it's like 2019, 2020, maybe our game will come out.
I don't know about you, but I was really surprised at the response we got too. I mean, I think we got a lot of positive interest from the different companies that we reached out into in Japan. Is that, would you agree with that?
For sure. Japanese companies are super interested to talk localization, not just in tabletop. In manga, video games, everything. And the tabletop industry, because not a lot of people are reaching out to folks talking about localization, they're really open to discussing what that could look like. And so we've had some good luck.
Yeah.
There have been some deals that have fallen through, and then some that we're really stoked about, like our project coming up.
Yeah, did you guys want to mention that? 'Cause I knew that was something that.
Well, it's funny.
Oh, hey.
I got a slide. It says shameless plug. So we got a game coming up. It's going to be hitting Kickstarter this spring. It's called Sinome Coliseum R. It is a board game, card game hybrid, mostly a card game, for 2 to 4 players. Super accessible. A ton of fun. Yeah, we were trying to break it not too long ago, and it's a tight game. They've shored that ship up quite well. It is hitting Kickstarter at the end of March. That's what we're hoping for, though it might be the first week of April. It's funny how timelines work. If you're interested, you can check out more. We're on social media at Lwing Publishing across the board. Just search that, you'll find us. SonomaColiseumR.com is the website for the game, or you can just go to our website, our company website, lionwingpublishing.com. We've been running a weekly localization blog, which has been talking about, we've been highlighting the characters in the game because it's a hero-based card game, and so we've been sort of highlighting each character each week, revealing their skills, revealing tactics, talking about sort of their strengths and limitations when it comes to how to play them. And we've been doing that to show more of the game, obviously, before the Kickstarter, but also just build a little interest to say, hey, this is what we've got going on. You can find that at either one of those websites, and you can check us out on Board Game Geek. We have a profile over there. And we have a newsletter. We're pushing this newsletter hard. We promise we don't spam inboxes. We, in fact, have not sent one single email. That has been by design, believe it or not, because I hate when people spam my inbox with garbage newsletters, and we promise not to do the same with ours. So it's on our website. You can check it out. It's on both websites, actually. And so, yeah, that's the gist of it. Sonoma Coliseum R, check it out. We're super stoked about it.
So that's a Japanese game that you guys are localizing for here?
Yeah,
If the Kickstarter is successful, I imagine.
Yeah. That is the caveat. And we are still planning on releasing the game that we had made ourselves as well. That's just, we have just pushed that back. I'm not sure if that was clear.
Sure. I didn't think it was your game, but I was.
Okay, yeah. This is the first
It's coming
translated
from
game.
Japan.
Yeah, so this one's coming from Japan, from a small team over there, MR Entertainment. They released this game back in May. It's actually sort of like a definitive edition, if you will. They released the first game under the title of simply Sonoma Coliseum 2 years ago. They got like amazing feedback on it. They're like, hey, we should add to this. Let's add 6 more characters, and a ton more cards. And so they released that this past May. Had a huge turnout, sold out through their initial print run, which was super cool. And they were actually the first guys that we approached. Just because we love the game. It's super fun, it's super easy to get into, and it's really cute. That's like the best way to describe it. It's an adorable little game.
Like the main characters are really cool, like the art style, and then all the supporting cards have like little chibi characters on them, so it's really cool.
Yeah, it's super rad. So they've been really awesome, really open to localization, and so the Kickstarter launches next month. Fingers crossed.
Cool. Sweet.
That is it. That's all we got.
Get more time. Can we